Hello everyone, I'm Matt Fisher, and I'm here with you this evening to talk a little bit about why public financing of campaigns is bad business for American taxpayers. Politicians pushing personal agendas, public financing of campaigns removes that personal connection that the private donor has with the public official. In other words, if you are providing money to support a campaign, that connection that you're making with that public official certainly creates a very personal connection, and that will allow you to help gear or steer that person who you're supporting in your direction in terms of what you support in personal beliefs and public policy and those issues of the sort. Personal donations maintain local ties. Politicians are more inclined to work for what's in the best interest of their financial backers, not if the money comes from another government pool of cash. So in other words, if the money's coming from a big pot of cash that everyone is chipping into, the money is not having that much of an influence on that person, that elected officials, what they're moving forward towards in terms of public policy. So that is something to consider as well. Candidates are those who financially support them have a vested interest in working together. So if you privately donate to a person who's running for office, you have already developed that connection with that person, that elected official who's seeking office, and therefore you're more inclined to work closer together as opposed to sending your money to a big pot or to a big pool of cash to Washington or to Albany, which would have less influence on that one-on-one connection and personal development that you've made. Guaranteed taxpayer money will create politicians who promote their own agendas with little regard for those who are paying to support them. In other words, that pool of money that each person who's running for office is pulling money out of really has no reason to vote more that is reflective of the private donors who are supporting them. So you certainly have to keep that in mind. One of my personal favorites, if you will, and I use that word favorites lightly, is taxes, taxes, taxes. We can go ahead and scroll to the next slide here. Taxes are already sky high in New York State. They're already sky high in the country. And if you're sick of paying high taxes, well, guess what? If campaigns are publicly financed, your taxes are going to go even higher. And the reason for that is that money, that pool of cash that's going to sit in Albany or in Washington, has to come from somewhere. So where is that going to come from? Well, your pockets. And that's certainly something that you have to keep in mind as well. If you're not interested in politics, or if you rather stay out of the fray of politics, if you are sending money to that pool of cash, you are less likely to have a choice in who is running for office. So in other words, the person who's running for office, they're taking money from a group of people as opposed to yourself, and therefore you have that choice if we're forced to spend our hard-earned money to support the political system. We all know that politicians like to spend money. That's a given. Expect that spending to be kicked into overdrive if we send all of our money into that big pot of cash that I've been referring to throughout my presentation to put their hands in. So in other words, you have more hands in the pots of that big pool of money where people are just, politicians are taking out of to run rampant with. And that's certainly something that you have to keep in mind as well. History tells us that we can't depend on the government to run programs effectively. We learned that with Social Security as a prime example. What happens is the government takes money from Social Security fund and moves it to another fund to support something that has nothing to do with Social Security. So what happens to Social Security? That money dries up and therefore leaves the people who put the money into the Social Security fund without anything to retire on. And we know that politicians tend to do that. They like to do that. And if a government-funded political campaign system certainly would not have its own watchdog, we couldn't depend on the government to basically watch itself. We have learned that time and time again, both in Washington and in Albany. Go ahead and move to the next slide. It's all about personal choice. We all make personal decisions to buy a house, a decision to buy a car. Those decisions are backed up by our own money. And decisions that require us to spend our own money to obtain what we wish. And that is a decision we're spending our own money with. And if you're putting money into that pool, that pot that any candidate can draw from, that removes that personal choice and is essentially using your money to allow that politician to do whatever they wish with it. The decision to run for political office is no different. A personal decision should be personally funded, not funded by taxpayers. Politicians like to spend money, especially on themselves, of course, don't they? Who doesn't like to spend money on themselves, but especially politicians? I'll go ahead and move to the next slide, Hubert, if we could. Publicly funded campaigns means we'll all be flipping the bill as politicians tour the